So it's time for what? It's time for what? One more time. It's time for what? Exactly. And that's why we're here tonight. I want to thank all of you for coming. And I do want Joseph Silk to know, I become the governor of this state. I promise you, we sign that bill. We make this thing happen. We are going to do this, right? Yes. Now, before we get started tonight, I need to give out a bunch of thank yous to all of you who have traveled great distances. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and God bless you for the fight that many of you have been fighting for years. Standing in the trenches when you felt like you were all alone, you were not. All of heaven has been watching. Do you remember the movie that was made back, I don't know, it was sometime, I think around 2000 or maybe in the 90s, Angels in the Outfield? You remember that movie? And you remember at the very end that the guy who plays, I can't remember the actor's name, but he's Doc Brown on Back to the Future, remember? And he's kind of the head angel. And you remember the one thing that he says right at the end? He says, and we're always watching. Do you remember that line? Let me tell you, friends, heaven has been watching. And heaven is watching tonight. And heaven is with us. We are not in this thing alone. You are not fighting alone. You are not standing alone. All of heaven is watching. So thank you for standing when you felt like you were all alone. You were not all alone. Now I know what some are saying out there. Well, Fisher is just a single issue candidate. He's just all about abortion and nothing else. Well, that would be so true if it wasn't so dadgum false. Because all you have to do is go to my website, and we're talking about all kinds of things. We're talking about how to actually shrink government. I actually will do what Republicans in Oklahoma say they believe, but none of them have the guts to do. I will do that. I will take the knife to bloated government and shrink it. I'm talking about proper government everywhere I go. Guys, we have a government that's incredibly improper, misusing the tax dollars that you are forced to pay in. And I've been all over the state enumerating how that government is misusing that money, how the government is filled with waste and duplication, sometimes misuse, sometimes corrupt misuse. We're talking about all kinds of things. But I still want to say this. You heard me say it in the video a moment ago. If we cannot get the issue of life right, does it really matter if we get the other things right? I mean, what if we could have the most robust economy in the union of all 50 states, but we couldn't get the life issue right? I recall Jesus saying, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? So friends, if we cannot get the life issue right, then we're not going to really get anything right. And let me also remind you that a government that will allow the most innocent among us to be murdered will steal from you. That kind of government will lie to you. That kind of government will abuse you and use you. So although we're about all kinds of things, and if you haven't been to my website, fisherforgovernor.com, go there. We're talking about all of these things. But I will admit that at the top of my list is life. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote it like this: out of the unalienable rights that we have received from our Creator, the top three, now I'm paraphrasing obviously, okay, he didn't say top three, but the top three are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you know why he listed life first? Because if you don't have that liberty, that right, the others don't matter. The others don't matter. So I will tell you unashamedly, proudly, boldly, yes, I'm about abolition. We must end this incredible slaughter and murder of the unborn that has happened at least in my generation's watch. We must bring that to an absolute and immediate end now. We must do it now. So just understand that I know what folks are going to say. Now, this particular rally and tomorrow's rally is all about abolition. So obviously we're going to focus on that tonight and tomorrow. But there are other gatherings where we talk about all kinds of other things. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands. So having said that, I think it's important for us to get some perspective. On February the 14th, a terrible, terrible tragedy, crime took place in Florida. A crazed, I would say evil individual gunned down 17 students in that school, killed them in cold blood, injured many others. Since that day, basically the news has talked incessantly, not just about the crime, and they should have been talking about the crime. It's terrible, it's heinous. But they're also talking incessantly about how guns are the reason, right? You can't turn on the news, even today, and not hear about that shooting in Florida. And God bless those families. I do pray for them. And in spite of those who say, well, what is that, thoughts and prayers? That didn't do nothing. Well, I find that God's word says the exact opposite, that the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. We're honoring Billy Graham today because he was a man of prayer, a man of faith. So we've been hearing nonstop since the 14th about what happened in Florida, and in many ways, that's justifiable. But friends, today, 20 babies were murdered in Oklahoma. The day before, 20 more babies murdered legally. Monday morning, the suction machines will be fired back up. 20 more will be murdered on Monday. The next day, 20 more. The next day, 20 more, 20 more, 20 more. And in a period of about 365 days, it will be somewhere around 5,000 or so. Where are the news stories? Where are the news stories? No one talks about it. And not only that, but anyone who has the courage to say something about it is criticized and called a crazy, a revolutionary, anarchist, wants to start a war. Just because we have the decency to bring to people's attention that we're murdering babies, unborn babies, at the clip of 20 a day in good old conservative Oklahoma. Now, I know everybody's saying, well, if we just could save those who are being aborted after 20 weeks, let's pass a bill. Well, okay. The overwhelming number, like 98% or so of all the babies murdered, are murdered before 20 weeks. Oh, well, it's just a glob of tissue, right? Well, you're looking at a 3D ultrasound of a baby at 17 weeks. Does that look like a blob of tissue to you? Well, if it is, it's highly organized, wouldn't you agree? Yeah. You show that picture to a 5-year-old and ask them, what is that? What do you think they'll say? That's a baby. Okay, you can jump forward to 20 weeks. Let me back up here. You can jump forward to 20 weeks. Does that look like a blob of tissue? No. No, that's a baby. Everybody knows that's a baby. Now, where's the church been? In all of this, where has the church been. I was born in 1959. I was 14 when Roe v. Wade came down from the Supreme Court. I attended a Bible-believing preaching church. My pastor, Brother Gilbert, was a godly man. He believed the Bible. And I think he would have been very much against abortion, but I don't ever remember one time hearing a sermon about how evil it was. Not one. And today, where is the church? Now, in Oklahoma, we're very pro-life. You're already reading the results of a Sooner poll in 2015, where Bill Shepard said, make no mistake about it, Oklahoma is a pro-life state. More than two-thirds, 68.7% considered themselves to be pro-life in Oklahoma. You cannot accuse us of not being pro-life enough. But we're murdering babies at the clip of 20 per day, every business day. A few weeks ago, we had our very first abortion-free state rally. South Oklahoma City. Some of you were probably there. We wanted to meet on the parking lot of a church that was within about 100 yards or less of what I call killing centers, a killing center. We call them abortion clinics. There's nothing clinical about it. I'm not going to go to a doctor that would do that to me. So we wanted to meet on the parking lot of this church. It's an evangelical church. We didn't want to use the building, just the parking lot. They said, oh, we can't do that. That's too political. We couldn't possibly do that. So we had to meet on a church parking lot about 4 or 5 blocks away and then march back up to the killing center when we dedicated it to our governor. Because that killing center, at least the ones who established it, said they were going to do it because she vetoed a bill that she could have signed. So we just dedicated it to her. Now I want you to think about this. As I drove past the church that morning that said, no, you can't meet in our parking lot, on the marquee of their church sign, it said this, not the bottom verse, because that wasn't supposed to come up yet. So just look at the top. The very top phrase is what was on their marquee. It says, in the womb, Jesus loved you. Well, that is correct. Look at the verse beneath, Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. God told the prophet Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So they're correct. But that was the sum total of their stand. We're not going to let you do anything on our parking lot, but we'll put a really nice sounding slogan on the sign. Praise God for the courage of that church and that pastor, right? As if that's going to do anything. But guys, I think that is actually quite representative of what the church in our state has been doing for about 45 years. Now, I will admit that a lot of people don't mean to be ignoring what's going on. That they don't mean to be protecting something like this, but they are, by their silence, by their inaction. But not only does the Bible say that God knows us and loves us in the womb, it also says in Proverbs 6, I know you know the passage, God hates those who shed innocent blood. And then the very next passage, Psalm 106, verses 37 through 40, God condemns his own people because they had become like the pagans who offered their children, God said, to demons. And he said, your soil is stained with the blood of the innocents. So, as a pastor, one who served 2 terms in our own legislature, who walked away because I was so frustrated with these so-called conservatives who campaign as conservatives, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-this, I'm pro-that. Just as soon as they get elected, they cease being all of that. This crazy transformation takes place. And all of a sudden, these ones who got out there and earned your votes by telling you how pro-life they are, actually behind closed doors in meetings, behind the veil, will kill, as you've just heard from Senator Silk, any real effort to end the very thing that they said they're against. And so after 2 terms, when I could have easily been reelected to a 3rd term, I walked away. I told my wife, I cannot spend another week in this place of hypocrisy. We'll just have to make a difference another way. So it was my intent to be finished with politics. I was still going to be an activist, but I wasn't going to run for another office. This spring, people started approaching me. Many of you know the story. I didn't want to do it. I laughed. I told some of my Christian friends, you've been on Uncle Ben's cough medicine again, haven't you? I told you need to knock that off. You got to be nuts. You got to be drunk, something. I'm not going to do that. But finally, their persuasiveness was enough to say, okay, here's what we will do. My wife and I will think about this. We'll pray about it. I was convinced God would say, no, don't bother yourself with it. You've done your stint, you know. But then something happened. As we got really serious with God, I wish I could tell you that I had a burning bush experience, but I didn't. It'd make it a lot easier if I had, I can tell you that. God didn't speak to me in an audible voice. I've known people who claim that God has spoken to them. Maybe He does. He does it to me. I didn't have a dream or a vision. I'm not suggesting God can't do that, but that's not what happened to me. But after my wife and I began to work through the checklist, I finally asked her, well, Pam, let me ask you this question. If we don't do this, 3 or 4 years from now, can we look back and say, wow, we're glad we didn't try that? And she looked at me with tears in her eyes, and she said, no. No, here's what we will say. We should have done it. We should have tried. So that's why I'm here. For those of you who know me, I have 0 political aspirations. I mean 0. I was at the Capitol the other day and my stomach got queasy again. I don't want to be there. So I'm not running because I'm trying to nurse some political future for myself. This is not my step on the way to some other political position. I'm not even running for a 2nd term. If I do get elected, when I am elected, and I do my very best, if the people of Oklahoma say, hey, we want you for a 2nd term, I'll say, well, here's what we'll do. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. I'm not sure I want another term. But I'm not running for a 2nd term. But see, that liberates me. Because what it allows me to do is to do the right thing regardless. I don't have to sit and there and calculate, well, what's this going to do to my reelection possibilities? Man, it's incredibly liberating to decide I'm just going to do what's right. I'm just going to do what's right. Now, let me ask you, what does that do to the legacy of a person if they're even concerned about that? Well, the perfect example is the man that was buried today that everybody knows about. Whether you necessarily like Billy Graham or not, look at what the life of a man who was committed to the gospel produced. Listen to what people are saying. Some of them may not even claim to be Christians. But the fruit of a life that is committed to doing as much as you can under God that is right is incredibly worthwhile, liberating. You can lay your head down on the pillow at night and say, I did everything that I could do to do what is right. So, the natural question then comes, so Dan, how are you going to abolish abortion in Oklahoma? I mean, that's big talk and all. How are you going to do that? Well, we're going to do it by asserting our state's sovereignty. That's how we're going to do it. Now, a lot of people say, well, I don't understand that, Dan. What are you going to lead a revolution? Well, I will admit that this thought may be revolutionary to a lot of people, But I'm not interested in leading a revolution. I'm actually interested in leading us back to our founding principles. That's what I'm interested in doing. Because in our founding documents, we find all of the principles that have produced this incredible amount of liberty and freedom for all of these decades that you and I have enjoyed, and yet over the last few decades, we've begun to abuse and jettison those principles, and now look what it has us. Guys, when I was in school during the fall and deer season, you could look out into the parking lot, and about half the guys' pickups had deer rifles hanging in the windshields. But I never had the slightest thought that one of those guys was going to go out there and get that deer rifle and come back in and start killing us. You can't do that today. It's the same gun, but it's a different heart. It's a different heart. So, getting back to our principles is the way that we're going to fix these things. So, I'm going to lay some ideas out here for you. First of all, I'm going to tell you that either the Declaration of Independence matters or it doesn't. I'm going to tell you that in that Declaration of Independence, when Thomas Jefferson wrote that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed, well, that either matters or it doesn't. We have a state called the state of Oklahoma. It has official borders. Well, either our borders matter or they don't. You see, we are at a crossroads as a culture. Either our founding principles still matter, or let's just admit it, they don't. Maybe we have experienced such a transformational metamorphosis that we've jettisoned all of the original founding principles, and we no longer embrace any of those things, which would be a tragedy if we have. But if we have, then let's just admit it. Let's quit playing the game. So, either these things matter or they don't. Now, I'm convinced that by reasserting state sovereignty, here's what happens. We are actually keeping the finest traditions of the founding of this country. We are actually living up to the principles that our founders followed. Not only that, but we will be reasserting something called federalism. Now, I realize that that's not an exciting topic. Generally speaking, most people don't sit around talking about federalism. But you understand that if we jettison that concept, you probably won't be sitting around talking freely much longer. Because there are those in this country who are bent on ridding us of everything that would even represent truth or biblical principle or anything having to do with our founding. So we must understand these things. Now, James Madison clearly defined what federalism is. Here's what he said. He said, when they were founding this new federal government that they called the central government, he said, just to ease everyone's minds, just remember that the powers we're going to delegate to this federal government are few and defined. And the powers that are going to be retained within the states are going to be numerous and indefinite. Now, I often ask this question to crowds. Do you honestly believe that Washington, D.C. today believes that its powers are few and defined? Do you think they believe that? No, they don't. Madison goes on to say that these powers would be focused on two different areas. That the federal government would be focused on what we would call foreign issues. Then he goes on to say that the states, exercising their powers, would be focused on all of the things that go on in the lives of their citizens, what we would call domestic issues. So he was trying to encourage the people who were considering whether or not they wanted to ratify this new constitution, that they had put all kinds of protections so that this great new federal government wouldn't run away with itself and override the sovereignty of the states. Thomas Jefferson even says, can any good be affected by taking from the states the moral rule of their citizens and subordinating it to the general, that's what they call the federal government or the federal authority? Such an intention was impossible and would break up the foundations of the Union. I believe the states can best govern our home concerns and the general, that's the federal government, our foreign ones. Guys, this is from Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence. But then he gives us a warning. He says to take a single step beyond the boundaries thus drawn, meaning drawn by the enumerated powers given to the federal government, Article 1, Section 8, to take a single step beyond that, notice what he says, is to take possession of a boundless field of power no longer susceptible of any definition. Now I want you to think about what's going on around us today. Isn't that exactly what's going on? The federal government has been allowed to just simply run over the states. We're going to tell you how you're going to define this. We're going to tell you what label to put on your bathrooms. We're going to tell you who can go into those bathrooms. We're going to tell you how to define marriage. We're going to tell you whether or not you're going to buy health care. We're going to tell you actually how to brush your teeth if we decide to. You see, once you allow a central government to overstep the boundaries, there's no limit. Because government has an insatiable hunger for power. And it will not stop. So then what do you do, Dan? I mean, you've got all the answers. What do you do then? Well, I don't have the answers, but I can tell you what we can do. We can ask the founders because they knew what they intended. Listen to what Madison says in the Virginia Resolution in 1798 when he was responding to federal overreach with the Alien and Sedition Acts. Listen to what he says. He says, whenever the federal government, I'm paraphrasing, when the federal government oversteps its boundaries, listen to what he says. The states who are parties thereto have the right and are, now catch this next part, are in duty bound to interpose for arresting the progress of the, notice that word, evil. Madison calls the overreach of federal government evil. He doesn't just say unconstitutional, he calls it evil. Thomas Jefferson, in the Kentucky Resolution, written the same year, speaking out against the same unconstitutional Alien and Sedition Acts, which made it actually against the law to speak negatively of the president. You say, well, they weren't serious about that, were they? Yes, they put people in jail, 60 over it. One of them was a congressman from Vermont. So listen to what Jefferson says. Whenever the general government assumes undelegated powers, that means anything outside of Article 1, Section 8, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. Listen to those words. Now you say, well, Dan, this is not a typical campaign speech. Well, I'm not a typical candidate, okay? So it just kind of fits. But here's the reason why these things are so important. Because if we don't understand these, we're going to continue our slavish submission to the U.S. Supreme Court, or when Congress tells us to jump, we're going to ask them how high. And if we don't understand who we are and the authorities that we have naturally from God, actually outlined in our foundational documents, then we're no longer the people we were, and we're no longer the people I hope we still are. So, even the big government guy, Alexander Hamilton, who I'm convinced never been a government he didn't like, even he says, if the federal government should overpass the just bounds of its authority and make a tyrannical use of its powers, the people whose creature it is. Now I want you to listen to that. Who formed the federal government? The people. You'll hear this throughout All of the founders' writings, the people, the people, the people. Even Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg, like him or not, said, so that government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Even he understood the founders well enough to know that it is the people, not the courts, not Congress, the people. We are the people. But if we sit here like sheep and do nothing, I promise you, not only will the federal government run over you, your state government will run over you. It is the job of the people to hold their government accountable. And I've watched it. If I had time tonight, I could tell you horror stories of what happened in the 4 years that I was in the legislature that would make you so angry, you would be looking for pitchforks and torches. I'm telling you, you would. And here's the thing, at least in Oklahoma, and I'm not bashing parties here, because I'm just as mad at the Republicans as I am the Democrats. So understand, I don't play any favorites. Here's the one thing I did appreciate about the Democrats when I was in the legislature. They did what they said they were going to do. The Republicans would look at you and say one thing and just lie through their teeth. And so I watched as they would betray the very things they campaigned on. Now, I want to ask you a question. Since then, we have the Constitution and all these things that keep constantly being changed because of the courts who grabbed power back in 1803 called judicial review. Therefore, they've decided they call all the shots and make all the rules. Is the Constitution a suicide pact? Do you honestly believe that the founders would have delegated certain powers listed in Article 1, Section 8 if they thought that federal government was going to start stretching those to make them anything they wanted them to be? No, they wouldn't have joined that. And even Alexander Hamilton admitted that then the state should rise up and fix it. Now, let me ask you a question. Easy illustration here. I'm kind of a football fan, and so let's use football. Let's say that you're going to go play a team on their home field, and it just so happens that they own the refs. So first of all, you're probably going to be inclined not to go, right? But they're in your conference, so you need to go play them. And then you discover that those refs have been authorized by the Association of Refs and high schools or colleges or whatever level this is. This group of refs have been authorized to reinterpret the rules anytime they see fit. So here you are playing a game, and these refs can meet in a huddle out in the middle of the field and change the rule book right in the middle of the game. Are you going to be interested in playing that team? So let's say it's 3rd down and a foot. Your team is scratching and clawing, and so you get down in your stance, and boom, you hit that other team, and by blood, sweat, and just growl, you make that foot. Everybody's high-fiving, woohoo, 1st down. The ref walks up and says, 4th down. You say, whoa, wait. We made the 10 yards. Well, we just met in conference, and a 1st down now is 11 yards. Would you walk off the field? Of course you would. Now, friends, what I've just illustrated to you is judicial review. When the federal courts can rewrite the rule book anytime they want to, friends, we're sunk. Unless we stand up and say, "Ho! You're breaking the rules." Now, let me tell you how that happened just a few years ago. John Roberts is supposed to be the savior justice, right? All along, the federal government had argued, this is not a tax. Well, no. The Affordable Care Act, this is not a tax. This is a penalty. Penalty. Not a tax. Then finally, it's time for the lawyers in black robes to make their decision. Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, says, well, here's the reason why they can force health care on you, because it's a tax. What? The federal government's been arguing all along it's not a tax. Well, but you see, you don't understand. We're smarter than all of you. 9 of us have worked our way through law school. We've worked our way up through the appellate level courts and all, and we're just smarter than the rest of you. And we've just decided that we can just change it. So now all of a sudden it's not a penalty, it's a tax. You know why he did that? Let me tell you why he did that. Because in Article 1, Section 8, one of the delegated powers delegated to the federal government was the power to tax. Now, anybody in their right mind knows that the founders meant the power to tax as you carry out these enumerated powers, not the unlimited power to tax. So for instance, if it's unlimited, they could all decide, hey, you're killing the climate, so all of you are going to have to drive a Prius. So you're going to have to park your car and you're going to have to go borrow the money and buy a Prius. Now we all know that sissies drive Priuses, right? Now I said that because Russell Hunter drives a Prius. I just want you to know. And are those jeans of his made out of elastic? What are those things made out of? I asked him a while ago, I said, Russell, did you buy that outfit today to wear tonight? And he said, yeah. I said, oh, you couldn't find it in the men's department, huh? Okay, now here's the deal. They decide that they're going to force you to buy a Prius. You say, well, I don't have the money to buy it. Well, it doesn't matter, because what they're going to call it is a climate tax. Well, it's in our enumerated powers. It says the power to tax. Now, does anybody think that that's what the founders had in mind? Of course not. So then, I'm not an anarchist. I'm not a rebel. I'm actually a man who believes in the rule of law, and I'm trying to lead us back to it. That's what I'm trying to do. There was a generation of Americans who decided, you know what, we just can't give up any more land. Not literally, but figuratively. And so they drew a line in the dirt, just like Travis, we're told, did at the Alamo. And they said, we're just not going to go any further. We've given up all we can. And they died in sweat and tears and blood on battlefields all across those colonies. It actually began in 1775, so the war was practically 8 years long. Can you imagine that? 8 years. Places like Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, Bennington, Vermont, places like Springfield, New Jersey, places like this outside of Boston, at that North Bridge in Concord. All of these places, these great patriots stood and they fought. Now, I'm not calling for that. I'm not asking people to go home and get their guns and start fighting. Friends, we have political and spiritual weapons in our arsenal if we will use them. So very quickly now, as I've used up way too much of your time, I want to give you my plan for abolishing abortion in Oklahoma when I become governor. It's really not rocket science. So here's what I intend to do. I realize that the governor is not the king of Oklahoma. I know that. But the governor has something called a bully pulpit. And if there's one thing I know how to use, it's a pulpit. Step number 1. The moment I'm inaugurated, I will call a special session, an emergency session of the Oklahoma legislature. You say, Dan, why don't you just wait till session begins? Well, you see, the governor has no input in the regular session, but when he calls a special emergency session, he sets the rules for that session, at least the content of that session, the reason it's called together. And here's what I will ask for. I will ask for a bill on my desk that criminalizes abortion as murder, and I'll sign it. That's my first step. I will also, among many things that I don't have time to get into now that will deal with the economy and the size of government and all that, but that's it for another time. I will also ask our legislature to literally restrict the jurisdiction of the courts. I know that that's a big, lengthy discussion, but it can be done, and that's what I will ask our legislature to do. Number two, once I have signed that bill, I will instruct all law enforcement officials to immediately close every abortion facility in Oklahoma in accordance with their sworn oaths of office. I will also instruct those law enforcement officers that if they find someone attempting to perform or performing an abortion, that next day they'll be arrested for attempted or committed murder. That next day. Because you see, I'm convinced that that's what it is. What else do you call it? Now, I want to add this real quickly here because I know a lot of people will say, well, Dan, that sounds like you don't care. Friends, I care so much, I'm willing to put my reputation and my life on the line for this. But let me also tell you that for those who have been involved in an abortion, maybe someone in this room had an abortion maybe years ago. Maybe you weren't the mother, but you urged her to have that abortion. I've had many over these 8 or 9 months that I've been campaigning coming up to me and say, Dan, can I just talk to you? I need to tell you. And these women pour out their hearts, this incredible load of guilt that they have carried for all of these years. And they said, when you said tonight what you said, it liberated me. Because here's what I said. I said, look, for all of those who have had an abortion, or if you participated in one, I want you to know, there is forgiveness in Christ. There is restoration in Christ. And this is the golden moment for the church and the community of faith to step up and finally do what we say we believe and minister to these ladies, reach out to them. If there is a lady with an unwanted or unplanned pregnancy, don't leave her to walk through it by herself. That church needs to step up and say, look, we're going to take every step with you. And if you decide that you can't raise this child, we will do everything within our power to help you find a home for that child. It is time for the church to do its job. To do its job. Now, I've got to hurry, okay? Third step. I will ignore all court orders attempting to thwart the will of the people and advise Oklahoma officials to ignore any federal court summons. Because here's the thing. I've already told you I'm out there talking about lots of stuff. Now, I know that my opponents are going to keep calling me a one-issue guy. I know that. That's the straw man that they're using. I get it. But I've made it quite clear to Oklahoma that if I'm elected governor, I'm going to end abortion. I'm going to end it. I can't do it without the people because I'm not the king of Oklahoma. But I've made it quite clear. So let me tell you what. When I take that oath of office, I'm going to have a mandate from the people because they know that's what I've been running on. And friends, I'm going to carry out the will of the people or I will die trying. I promise you, I tell you at this moment, that's what I will do. Step number 4. And this one I believe we'll get some help on. I'm going to call upon President Trump to stand with Oklahoma as we peacefully resolve the matter of court jurisdiction. Now, here's what I intend to do. Now, whether or not you're a Donald Trump fan or not, I understand everybody has mixed emotions. I get that, so I'm with you. But I'm quite amazed at a lot of the things he has done. And when he was running for office, if you remember, he said, abortion should be decided by the states. So let me tell you what I plan to do. When I win the primary, and I'm the Republican nominee, now I can't do it before that, but when I am the Republican nominee for governor, let me tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to call the White House. We're going to set up a meeting. I am going to fly to Washington, D.C. I'm going to meet with President Trump. I'll say, President Trump, I am the Republican nominee for governor of Oklahoma, and I am running to abolish abortion, and you said that the states ought to decide this. So I want to know, because you have about a 60 or a little over 60% approval rating in Oklahoma, I want to know, are you going to stand with Oklahoma and hold off the federal hounds while we do what you know in your heart is right? And I'm going to tell President Trump, now I'm not going to boss him around, he's the President of the United States, but I'm going to tell President Trump, I'll say, now President Trump, the people of Oklahoma are very interested in what you're about to tell me. So if you say yes, I'm going to stand with Oklahoma, you're doing what's right, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell that whole state that President Trump is going to stand with us. But if you say no, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell that whole state that you chickened out. That's what I'm going to tell the President of the United States. We're just about to the end. Number 5. I've already mentioned this, but it's something that we need to do officially. And that is, I will call for judicial reform which will remove the power of judicial review from the courts. That is not the power of the courts. Let me tell you who has the power of judicial review. The consent of the governed. Government must respond to the people. By the way, did you know that our Oklahoma Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, says that all political power is inherent in it says people. Interestingly enough, it doesn't say courts. It doesn't even say the legislature. They're the closest to the people because the people elect them. But it says all political power is inherent in the people. That is echoing what Jefferson wrote in the Declaration when he said all governments derive their authority from the consent of the governed. When are we going to get that in our heads? So I'm going to call upon our legislature and our congressional delegation to introduce legislation both here in the state, even if we have to amend the state constitution, and in Congress to restrict the jurisdiction of the courts and take away judicial review. 6, and then we're done. I'm going to call upon Christians in Oklahoma to practice pure and undefiled religion. And I'm going to call upon the church as governor to assist these mothers and fathers who have previously or would have formerly sought an abortion. I'm going to lead for a change as a governor. I'm going to actually step out and lead. Now I know, whoa, we need to finish up. I know that some of you are thinking, well, Dan, you're going to have a hard time with this legislature, and you're probably right. Although I do believe that they could play better if they had better leadership. Have you ever seen a team that isn't as good as they actually play, but they play up to really good leaders? And have you ever seen a team that's actually really good, but they have an awful record because they don't have any good leaders and they play down to their leadership? I really believe we had good leadership, our legislature would do a lot better than it has been doing. It just has no leadership. And what leadership has been shown has been horrible. It's been pathetic. So here's what I will do. In my inaugural speech, I'm going to serve warning to every member of the legislature, especially my party, the Republican Party. Here's what I'm going to tell them. You folks campaigned as pro-lifers. You refuse to make good on that promise, and I make a promise to you. I will be in your district, I will call you by name, and I will campaign against you. Publicly, loudly, and boldly. I'm going to call you account for everything you've said that you would do. I will do it. I'm telling you, as God is my witness, I will do it. Now let me close with this little illustration. Thank you guys. Let me close with this little illustration. If you're from Oklahoma, you probably know where Cordell, Oklahoma is. I just picked Cordell, but it's a little country town. It's a county seat. Can you imagine the governor of Oklahoma announces in the press, in a press conference, that there is a state representative and a state senator representing the area of Cordell that refuses to keep the promise they made to the constituents who voted for them. They said they were pro-life, they won't do it. So I'm going to be there next Thursday. I want you to meet me there. I'm going to call them by name, and I'm going to call their citizens to have a recall vote on them and kick them out. Can you imagine what would happen when a governor does that? So, what this is really all about, friends, and you know it, it's about restoring life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if you don't honor life, the rest don't matter. So I'm telling you that the time for justice is the time for justice is when? When? Now! And we need to scream that loudly so that that legislature and that governor's office and all the way to Washington, D.C. can hear that the people in Oklahoma have had enough already. Enough already. We, the people, are going to take back what is rightfully ours, and you're going to operate by the consent of the governed, not the consent of the courts. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. God bless you. Thank you for your support. God bless you. God bless you.